I bring a recon helicopter to try and spot them, because obviously the terrain differences means land recon is almost has to go into the valley, right into their units to do anything about it. Now as you can see, here's a lot of Dornier 205 infantry transport helicopters. I thought what was going on was they were planning to sneak them around the edge of the map and cut off some supply routes around Michael. But however, they actually were doing a flanking force here. As you can see, I'm bringing in Svikas to try and kill these guys. But what they're actually doing is depositing their troops right into the battle, because obviously these are airborne troops. And I thought, no problem. I mean, they're going down in a pretty stupid place. But yeah, they were 80 km infantry. Lots of 80 km infantry. This is the problem I was having, which was because they're securing such a large part of the map, they are getting a lot more money in than all of us, which means that they can just call in a lot more than us. So at this point, I'm going to respond by bringing in PT-76s. As you can see, these 80 kms are just terrorizing my armoured columns and have essentially ripped up almost everything I have. So what I'm thinking of is bringing in a lot of keep units to make them absorb all their 80 kms, which hopefully will buy us some time. They run out of rockets. Also bringing in some Strela 2s, or no, sorry, Strela 1s, to try and stop any more guys being deposited, but frankly they've done their work. So yeah, these are a new unit. I've never seen the CAD Commando unit before, but after this battle it's definitely something I'm not really looking forward to again. I was considering bringing in some helicopters to deal with this guys, but they had some anti-aircraft support here, which made me reluctant to do it. As you can see, the sheer volume of ATMs being fired up on these guys is ridiculous. So it's sort of a good thing though, because a lot of these ATMs are being wasted, because like 10 guys are firing at one tank, whereas one ATM is enough to finish it off. But then again, I am losing a lot of units. However, we have actually got a pretty good points advantage when you look at it, 4,000 to 2,400. So we can afford to take a few losses to get rid of these pesky 80 km infantry. That was my point of view anyway. Also, I'm bringing in some more aircraft. Haven't really used them much since the start of the game, since I'd assumed that their rear base would definitely have some advanced anti-aircraft defences. As you can see, they're now supporting these 80 km infantry with tanks, so I bring in my own tank hunters to finish them off. Obviously the tank hunters will be useless against the 80 km infantry, but hopefully they can finish off the tanks. Let's see, so moving on to Poland again, I'm just going to talk about their helicopters, which they only have one helicopter that's available exclusively as a helicopter, and it's a sort of a Swiss Army knife, because it's got a machine gun, it's got rocket pods, and it's got Igla anti-aircraft missiles, which are actually, aside from their dedicated stuff, the best anti-aircraft missiles Poland has. Which is interesting, I have to say, definitely. So overall, these gunships, I don't use them too much because of how often tanks come into play, and because jets are everywhere, people usually use quite sophisticated anti-aircraft defenses, which makes helicopters a bit redundant. That's something I found in this game, which is because the anti-aircraft defenses have had to become so advanced to deal with the jets. Helicopters usually can get ripped to shreds unless they're micromanaged very carefully. Let's see. Another problem I was having is my artillery. As you can see, some of it's panicked and shaken. There was a lot of they were definitely trying to keep my artillery out of the game by continually shelling it, which was annoying, but that's all I could really do, was try and maneuver it, get off a few shots, maneuver it again. But yeah, the battle is going quite well in our favour. We're moving up now to 5,000 points. They're still on only about 3,000, so we've got a pretty hefty points advantage at this point. As you can see, I'm bringing in my helicopters because I think that they'll do well against this airborne infantry. More jets are coming in, more Strela missiles are slamming into their hulls and knocking them down. I think this is one of the big sources of our points advantage here. Elsewhere, the gang commandos are moving up. Pretty stupid micromanagement here, because obviously 80 km infantry, when it's on the move, they can't fire their missiles, which means my tanks can just have a field day against them. However, there is a lot of them. and eventually they'll stop and fire their missiles. And in that close quarters, it wouldn't last long, really. As you can see, I'm still buying in more Strela 2s, just because, you know, they can concentrate their forces, knock out one or two of them, and a full-on fire like this will work well. As you can see, my ally is now bringing TO-55s into the fight. You know, they're technically better than the T-55L, but, you know, I prefer to use the T-55L just because there's no excess. You know, you're only using what you pay for. The flamethrower usually isn't that much of a bonus, except when fighting riflemen and non-ATKM infantry. Now, if you look at the map, you can see a blue dot right in the rear of our base, which means that they've clearly flanked around my stronghold and are now in our base, which is a worry, because another mechanic in this which impedes mobile armies is that there's only certain command zones that allow you to deploy jets, and if you don't hold one, you can't deploy jets. And usually these are your rear command points. So pretty much this strategy of forcing in and concentrating on their base is good in terms of, like, just concentrating on a force, but it's bad in terms of when they knock out our rear support. Not only do we lose points, but we lose jets. Now at this point I wasn't too worried about jets, because as you can see I'm concentrating on the land forces more at this point, but jets are a crucial factor in this, so you definitely don't want to be losing your reinforcement jet zones. So as you can see, more stuff's being brought in. That's the thing, they were definitely deluging us with power. In this battle I felt it was more about bringing in more units than they had because of our points advantage, rather than actually using any clever tactics. I must admit the ATKM infantry was a pretty clever move, but aside from that I haven't seen much clever movement. So at this point I've noticed that they're sort of flanking around us, and I think they knocked out the command vehicle. No, they didn't. That was just trick of the eye. So I was considering moving all our forces to concentrate on the offensive, but then I thought might as well just hold off. So as you can see, they've now stopped their ATKM forces, and it's another volley of ATKM fire, which is causing quite a lot of damage. There's only about 1,500 points in it, so they've closed the gap by about 500 points. It's just us trying to, you know, hammer into their defenses. The chieftains are firing on the T-55s. Remember, the T-55s are a pretty bad tank, and it would, you know, you sort of look at it as the best that Poland has to offer, but it's pretty bad when compared to other tanks. Still better than the T-34s they had in European escalation. Let's see, elsewhere, Gaggers have been deployed in the middle of nowhere. Not really sure why. Elsewhere, the Fusiliers are holding on to that forest very well. As you can see, again by the blue dots, I'm focusing on this side, but we can still look at the map. There's blue units swarming all over our rear, so clearly they decided that we're too good fighting up, you know, face to face, so they're going to hit our rear, force us to spread our forces out a bit. But it looks like they're concentrated mostly on air force, and we have a lot of ATKM units, so that helps. More planes are flying around and getting shot down. As you can see, planes get crashing left, right and centre. Let's see, we're now up to 6,000 points. Again, it doesn't actually affect who wins the game, but it just shows how well we are, you know, killing them. I try and push some more of my infantry forward to take out this artillery, which is quite annoying, and now I'm out of tanks, so I'm calling in the TO-55s. Also, they're actually quite good against the Gagger, because obviously against riflemen the flamethrowers will do a huge amount of damage. Let's see, elsewhere, let's see, I'm trying to focus again my artillery on the Gaggers because there's a lot of weak units clustered together. That's where I'm trying to move up my anti-aircraft defences or buy supplies for those that do not have any supplies. Also, as you can see, there's 2 command units in the same sector. Not a good idea, but because but I guess that's sort of mismanagement, because we were all like concentrating on one corridor defense, which means that we don't have a lot of zones to go between our units. As you can see, the flamethrowers are now making quick work of the Gagger, knocking them out quite effectively. More infantry transports are being brought in. Again, it's sort of like a attrition warfare, I guess you could say, where they're just like hoping to bring down our defenses. Now this is something I wasn't expecting. A random command vehicle in the middle of nowhere. I don't know why I was there. It's not in their rear base. It's pretty much just being driven to the front lines. I'm not sure what their plan was, maybe to try and get around to neutralize Michael, But yeah, it was interesting. Elsewhere, more ATGM troops being brought around. As you can see, this area is quite open field, so yeah, they keep bringing ATGM troops to try and knock out our tanks, then bringing in infantry. At this point, I'm going to bring in some of my Fago infantry, because obviously they do very well against dedicated anti-tank units. Elsewhere, some of the GAG commandos somehow managed to break through my lines without knocking out the Strela, which is a bit of a worry, because if they can get to that hilltop, they can fire ATGMs at my anti-aircraft defences, my artillery. So I immediately respond by just swarming the area with infantry. Also, I'm not sure why I did this, but I repurposed my anti-tank infantry to try and take them out. I was just completely worried about these veteran units firing ATGMs into my stuff, so I repurposed anything that could hit them. Over here, more Gets just trying to hammer down this area into submission, but it seems to be holding off quite well. Tu-55 is brought up, but again, remember these are ATGM infantry, so if they can just nail it with a rocket like that, they can do a huge amount of damage. You know, close quarters, there's not much room to miss. There's the last of my rifles. A quick burst of flamethrower should stun them enough so they're not much of a threat anymore. Elsewhere, I'm going to try and use the artillery on the tank destroyers. You know, this stuff's quite poorly armoured, so the artillery should be able to panic it, because remember, artillery, when you stun it, you know, anti-tank units like these, the ATGM units, they are very heavily affected by morale, because if they're injured or, you know, have an anti-morale effect on them, it does a huge amount of damage to their accuracy. It essentially renders them useless if you can stun them, which is definitely useful, because all these ATGMs are firing in our stuff. I'm responding with my own ATGM units and calling in the Air Force as well, because they don't seem to have that good anti-aircraft defense, I've noticed. So again, bringing in more supplies to keep my anti-aircraft defenses running while still hammering home on them. Elsewhere, more forces are hammering in on the rear pocket. As you can see, all the FOBs have now been captured, so these guys are essentially left isolated. That means, again, it's only a matter of time before they move into our other forces on the left side. My guys again make a strafing run, take a few hits, but nothing that big, it looks like. Anything else? Some more that's another thing I've noticed, which is ATGM squads only have 2 infantry in them, which is, I guess, to balance them out, because they're ridiculously easy to kill most of the time. Because obviously there's only 2 people, one tank shell will, even if it's just a light scrape, the tank shell will finish them off with no problem. Let's see, elsewhere, my artillery's calmed down now, so it's quite effective. Now I'm starting to bring in more recon units. Because they don't have any anti-aircraft defense, I think the Mi-24D will be a good helicopter to bring in here. Elsewhere, targeted artillery helps my allies in flushing these last stragglers out of the forests. Tu-55 is actually now running out of shells because it's been fighting for so long, which I guess is a good thing. And about half an hour into this, let's see, 7,200 to 5,800. It's quite a good score for us. Again, remember, the score doesn't matter, but it's just a reflection of how well we're doing. They're throwing a lot of units against us, but if we can just keep fighting them off effectively, we can just wear them down. Because that's another thing, which is when you've in total destruction, you often wear down your forces, so you literally field every single unit available in your decks, and at this point control of the map is irrelevant, because command points can't buy you anything. If anything, they're actually a weak point, because usually it comes down to who destroys all the CVs of the other guy first, and if you're capturing all these points, well, I guess it means more CVs, so you have more to kill, but, you know, more CVs mean, you know, they're painting themselves by capturing points, so you know where they are, and also there's usually 1 or 2 spots where people always put their CVs in. Anyway. So elsewhere, more tracked rapiers are coming in. I guess our Air Force was causing some annoyance, so they're bringing in quite a lot of anti-aircraft defenses, as you can see here. Tracked rapiers, M113 AT-ATs.